I love a good mystery. So, years ago, when I heard rumours that there was a city cut from Oblivion before it was released, I got hooked on finding out more about it. I've touched upon Oblivion's missing city in the Urban Legends of Oblivion video, but I wanted to go into it in more detail, so here we are. In the release version of Oblivion, players can visit 9 major cities across Cyrodiil, but there was meant to be a 10th city, a place called Sutch, which is conspicuously absent from the game world. References to Sutch appear in Elder Scrolls lore and even in Oblivion's pre-release media. Yet by the time Oblivion launched, Sutch had vanished, leaving only a lonely fort on the Gold Coast as a trace of its existence. What happened to the city of Sutch? Was it lost to some cataclysm in Tamriel's history or simply cut from the game during development? In this video, we're going to take a look at the mystery of Sutch from both in-universe and real-world perspectives, piecing together lore origins, historical mentions, in-game remnants and developer commentary to understand this lost city. Along the way, we'll explore how fans and modders have tried to restore Sutch, and how new official lore in Elder Scrolls Online has given new life to Oblivion's missing city. Before we dive in though, I want to remind you all that the algorithm is a fickle beast and engagement is everything, so you can help me by liking, hyping, commenting, all that good stuff. And if you want more of this content, don't forget to hit the subscribe button. This year I'm aiming to try and reach at least 50k subs, so every single person who clicks counts towards that goal. And of course, check out the rest of my videos too once you sub. Finally, I want to say a big thank you to my channel members and Patreon supporters who are generously contributing to me being able to do this full time. Anyway, with that being said, let's crack on. Long before Oblivion, Sutch was not an unknown name. It appears multiple times in Elder Scrolls lore as a real settlement. Sutch was a major Colovian city in northwestern Cyrodiil from the First Era through to the end of the Third Era. It occupied the Gold Coast region near the border with Hammerfell, north of Anvil and not far from where Kvatch's county ends. In its prime, Sutch was a notable cultural and trade hub famed for its artists, artisans and performers, attracting visitors interested in artistic and philosophical pursuits. The city's influence extended over a region known as County Sutch, which reached north to the Brenna River, the river marking Cyrodiil's border with Hammerfell. Today, that same area is considered a part of County Kvatch, suggesting that at some point Sutch's territory was absorbed by Kvatch. The name Sutch surfaces in several in-game books and maps that establish its historical existence and significance. A map of Western Tamriel, reportedly compiled from maps and art in the Elder Scrolls Adventures Redguard and other sources, clearly labels Sutch on Cyrodiil's western edge, roughly where it would later have been in Oblivion. Even Arena, the first Elder Scrolls game, may hint at Sutch. While Sutch was not a visitable city in Arena, one unused quest marker in Arena's data is located south of the Brenna River near Hammerfell's border, exactly where Sutch would be. This suggests the location was at least on Bethesda's radar from the earliest days, though it never featured as a playable city then either. Then there's the Second Era Chronicle of Jorun, the future High King of Skyrim, which notes that as a youth, Jorun travelled across Tamriel and stayed in many cities, including Sutch in Cyrodiil. The mention is brief but telling. Sutch was significant enough in the Second Era to host a Nord prince seeking cultural experiences. This context emphasises Sutch's artistic reputation, implying it was a flourishing city at that time. Then there's the Field Guide to River Trolls. This scholarly work by Phrastus of Elenir, an imperial lorekeeper in Elder Scrolls Online, provides a vivid anecdote linking Sutch to the local environment. Phrastus writes of visiting the marketplace of Sutch and seeing the carcass of a river troll on display. A hunter had slain the troll near the Brenna River, which corroborates Sutch's location as a riverside trade town on the Cyrodiil-Hammerfell border. The casually mentioned marketplace of Sutch indicates the city was active around the time of the Plane Meld, a big part of Elder Scrolls Online's storyline circa the Second Era 582, which, as we'll see later, was confirmed by content added to Elder Scrolls Online, but I won't spoil that part just yet. Then there's Thief of Virtue. This book, which appears in Oblivion, Skyrim, and Elder Scrolls Online, presents a salacious tale involving a wealthy Baron of Sutch named Ignace and his Baroness Veronique. A master thief sneaks into Castle Sutch to steal coins but ends up hiding and inadvertently philandering with the Baroness. Aside from the colourful story, the book provides two lore details. It describes the Baron's castle and Sutch as having tall and unscalable walls, and it claims that Sutch is a city in Hammerfell, not Cyrodiil. This geographic inconsistency has puzzled lore fans. It could be a simple error by the in-game author or developers, but it has led to theories discussed later that perhaps Sutch at one time fell under Hammerfell's control, or that there might have been another Sutch in Hammerfell. Most evidence, however, points to Sutch being a Colovian city. The Hammerfell reference is likely a mistake or a quirk of shifting borders. In any case, Thief of Virtue cements that Sutch had its own nobility, a baron instead of a count, curiously, and a formidable castle. There are other interesting literary references as well. Two obscure books from Elder Scrolls Online add further bits of lore about Sutch via their authors. One is Thibet's Cairn and its History, written by Caronius of Sutch, clearly identifying the author as a native of the city. Another is The Rite of Boethia's Gauntlet, attributed to Thenderamor Deathblossom, who is described as Boethia's conduit of Sutch. Both of these imply that Sutch produced scholars or cult agents of some renown. In Thendaramor's case, being Boethia's conduit suggests Sutch had some connection to the worship of the Daedric prince Boethia, or at least that one of Boethia's chief followers hailed from there. Indeed, there is lore that we'll look at later that notes that Sutch in the late Second Era had to deal with Daedric cult activity. The Death Blossom overseeing Boethia's gauntlet likely did so out of Sutch. This paints a picture of a city that not only was a cultural centre but also had its share of dark intrigues and religious significance. And finally, for this section, we're going to take a look at military and trade history. Although detailed histories of Sutch are few and far between, the lore we've looked at so far, and other minor tidbits of lore I haven't specifically pointed out, provide a timeline of sorts. Sutch served as a strategic trade centre between Cyrodiil and Hammerfell for much of its existence. Being on the Gold Road, the highway running west from Anvil and near a navigable river, it was ideally placed for commerce. It even attracted philosophers and performers, hinting at a cosmopolitan atmosphere. Sutch appears to have weathered various conflicts. It held strong through the Knatin flu and local wars, and during Tiber Septim's conquest in the late Second Era, it did not become a battlefield itself. In fact, when Tiber Septim united Cyrodiil under the Third Empire, Sutch was one of the Colovian states that swore fealty without apparent strife. So from these lore sources and others we'll be looking at later, we can establish that Sutch was very much a real city in the Elder Scrolls world, prominent in the First and Second Eras and apparently still around in the Third. It had barons or counts, a castle, walls, a thriving market, and a reputation as a lively trading hub and cultural spot. This makes it all the more intriguing that when players roam Cyrodiil in Oblivion, set in the Third Era year 433, there is no city of Sutch to be found, only a ruined fort. The lore doesn't explicitly narrate Sutch's demise within the game, leaving a gap between its last known mentions and its absence by the late Third Era. To understand why, we must next look at how Oblivion handles Sutch, or rather doesn't handle it, and what evidence there is of this missing city in the game's design and files. When Oblivion was released in 2006, players noticed something odd about Cyrodiil's geography. The game features the capital, the Imperial City, and 8 other major city locations, such as Anvil, Bravil, Coral, etc., one for each of Cyrodiil's counties. Except that the western territory between Anvil and Kvatch has no city, only wilderness. This is peculiar because lore-wise that area corresponds to County Sutch. Indeed, fans soon discovered clues suggesting that Oblivion was originally supposed to include Sutch as a city, but that it was removed during development. So here are the main pieces of evidence that Sutch was a missing city in Oblivion itself. For example, we have the pre-release footage and maps. In Bethesda's E3 2005 demo of Oblivion, nearly a year before the game's release, the world map of Cyrodiil shown on screen included a city icon labelled Sutch. During that demo, Todd Howard showed the game's fast travel map and all the major cities were marked. In this early build, Sutch appears on the map northeast of Anvil, right where a Gold Coast city would logically be. However, interestingly, the icon used for Sutch in that demo is not the usual city marker, which looks like a house, but a fort marker. This implies that by the time of the demo, the developers might have already downgraded Sutch from city status, potentially planning to present it as a fortress or ruin instead of a full city. In the same E3 presentation, Todd Howard mentioned 9 main cities in Cyrodiil, matching the number in the final game, including the Imperial City. If Sutch were still considered a planned city at that point, there would have been 10. The fact that he said 9 adds weight to the suggestion that Sutch's city status was likely cut by mid-2005, even though the map still showed it, albeit as a fort icon. This E3 map with Sutch visible wasn't just shown in demos, the data was left in the game files. An unused menu screen video in Oblivion's files contains that early scrolling map with Sutch marked, proving that Sutch made it fairly far along before being excised. Then there's the Oblivion game world's terrain. If you travel to the spot where Sutch should be, north of Anvil near the border hills, you find Fort Sutch sitting amid an open, flat field. Many players commented that the terrain there is unusually flat and empty compared to the rest of the Gold Coast's rolling hills. This is not a coincidence. Developers typically flatten terrain when planning to place a city or large structures. The UESP notes that the area around Fort Sutch is unusually flat and sparse compared to the rest of the Gold Coast, indicating that the land was prepared for a city that was never built. In effect, the game's landscape still bears the footprint of Sutch, a large, level space, even though only a small fort occupies it now. The implication being that during development the city was laid out or at least planned, then removed, leaving an empty plain where it would have stood. Then there's dialogue and journal clues. Although Bethesda tried to remove references to Sutch, a few slipped through in Oblivion's dialogue and quest text. Notably, the Fighters Guild questline has some telling remnants. In one Fighters Guild quest, Azan, the guild leader in Anvil, gives the player a contract to meet a scholar at a cave northeast of Sutch. Since there was no City of Sutch on the playable map, this direction might have confused players. Indeed, in the final game, the quest marker just points near Fort Sutch. More revealing is the journal entry for a later Fighters Guild quest, Mystery at Harlan's Watch. After completing it, the journal says, Burzgro Cash has paid me. He tells me he has no further contracts to offer, but I should speak with Azan in Sutch if I have not already. This further indicates that Azan was originally supposed to be in Sutch, not Anvil. In the final game, of course, Azan lives in Anvil, and that line about Sutch is never triggered because by then you've obviously already met Azan. The presence of that text in the game files confirms that at one stage of development the Fighters Guild had a chapter in Sutch with Azan as its leader. When Sutch was cut, Azan and the Fighters Guild Hall were relocated to Anvil, but the developers forgot to scrub all the journal references. This kind of evidence strongly supports that Sutch was planned as a functional city with guilds and quests, later merged into Anvil's content when Sutch was removed. In fact, Anvil having both a Fighters Guild and a port could have been originally split. Sutch might have had the Fighters Guild while Anvil had the port, for example to spread content. Then there's the missing chapel of Kinnereth. In Oblivion, each major city has a chapel dedicated to one of the 9 divines, except one. You can find the chapels of Akatosh, Arcade, Dibella, Julianos, Mara, Stendar, Talos and Zenithar, but Kinnereth, goddess of nature, has no chapel in any city. This odd omission makes more sense in light of Sutch. Unofficial content notes and cut files indicate that Sutch was meant to host the chapel of Kinnereth. When Sutch was cut, Kinnereth's chapel was simply dropped, and Kinnereth's worship in Cyrodiil got relegated to a small wayside shrine. This is another piece of evidence for Sutch. It fills a logical gap in the game's design, implying Sutch would have completed the 9 divines set. And then we have Oblivion gate placement. During Oblivion's main story, after a certain point, Oblivion gates, demonic portals, open outside each major city. In the final game, one such gate spawns near Fort Sutch, accompanied by a small squad of Imperial Legion soldiers who attempt to close it. This triggers the minor quest Attack on Fort Sutch. The interesting part is that Fort Sutch, not being a real city, still gets a gate just like the actual cities do. It seems the game treats Sutch as one of the city locations for gate placement. In fact, internally the cell for that gate is named in a way linking it to city events. This again suggests that the game's event scripting was set up when Sutch was counted among the cities. And although the city was removed, the event trigger remained, resulting in a gate at Fort Sutch by design. The Legion soldiers even consider it important enough to defend, which they only do for cities and strategic sites. It's as if Sutch is still on the list of key locations that need protection during the crisis, reinforcing that it was once intended to be a full city area. All these points paint a clear picture. Sutch was initially designed as a major city in Oblivion, complete with a count, or baron, guild hall, chapel, and surrounding infrastructure. Sometime before final release, the city was scrapped from the playable world. What remained in the shipped game were echoes of Sutch. A fort with an inexplicably large footprint, a few lines of text referencing it, and logical gaps like Kinnereth's missing chapel where Sutch used to fit. The natural question at this point, of course, is why Sutch was removed, and what remained. First, let's examine Fort Sutch itself, the lonely relic that Oblivion players can actually find, to see what it tells us about the lost city. Fort Sutch is all that remains of the city on the game map. Located north of Anvil along the Gold Road and a bit west toward Hammerfell's border, Fort Sutch is an old stone fortress ruin nestled in the Colovian highlands. By the time the hero of Kvatch arrives, no thriving town exists there. What you find is essentially a deserted fortification overtaken by outlaws. Despite this, Fort Sutch's presence in quests and its design provide tantalising hints of its past. First, there's its in-game appearance and layout. Fort Sutch consists of a walled fort structure with the typical crumbling walls and a couple of intact interior zones underground. During the Dark Brotherhood quest Bad Medicine, the assassin Teneva advises you about Fort Sutch and mentions the ruins of a tower once part of Fort Sutch Abbey, which lies a distance from the main fort connected by underground tunnels. Indeed, in that quest you can enter the fort through the old abbey entrance far from the main courtyard. This is unusual. Most forts in Cyrodiil don't have separate named annexes like an abbey. The presence of an abbey suggests that Fort Sutch was part of a larger complex, likely the city's religious centre outside the main castle. This implies a significant settlement once existed, a fortified abbey and the main keep interconnected, something beyond a lone military outpost. It's consistent with the idea that Sutch had a chapel of Kinnereth, possibly with the abbey being its remains. The fort's interior spaces are comparatively small, only a few zones, but the surrounding area is conspicuously broad and flat as mentioned earlier. Walking around Fort Sutch, one can observe a large flat plateau as if the ground had been cleared, perhaps for city streets and buildings that were never placed. This empty feel around Fort Sutch in-game had long led players to suspect a missing city even before knowing the cut content details. By the time of Oblivion, Fort Sutch is not held by any noble or official faction. Instead, it's occupied by mercenaries turned bandits. In the aforementioned Dark Brotherhood quest Bad Medicine, you infiltrate Fort Sutch to assassinate a warlord named Roderick. The interesting part is that if you visit Fort Sutch before that quest, Roderick and his mercenaries aren't present at all. The fort will only have a handful of generic bandits inhabiting it. This indicates that, in peacetime, Sutch has no permanent settlement or guards. It's essentially lawless. The official mercenary company appears there only because the Dark Brotherhood storyline spawns them for the quest. After the quest, presumably the fort is empty again or back to being a minor bandit hideout. There is no count of such, no city guard, no villagers. The fort is explicitly no longer under any protection, rule, or care by the authorities of Cyrodiil. All of this fits the narrative that the city of Sutch had fallen into ruin long ago. We can look next at the structural clues from a game file's point of view. Fort Sutch's layout in the construction set, the game's editor, gives away more of its origin. Unlike typical forts, which usually occupy one exterior cell on the map, Fort Sutch spans multiple map cells named explicitly after Sutch. Data miners found that there are cells for Fort Sutch Exterior 01, 02, Fort Sutch Abbey Exterior, and even Fort Sutch Castle Exterior. In-game, of course, Fort Sutch doesn't actually have a visible castle separate from the fort. That castle cell is empty space in the final game. The existence of those cell names strongly implies that the fort was originally part of a much larger city layout. A castle area, an abbey area, etc., which were never populated with actual city architecture during development. It appears that Bethesda deleted the city structures but left some world space cells and naming conventions in place. Another subtle hint is a nearby location called Brina Cross. In Oblivion's final map, the Brina Cross Inn sits at a crossroads on the Gold Road north of Anvil. The name stands out because it's not just called something like the Gold Road Inn, it implies a crossing or junction. The early game map seen in the pre-release footage had a label Brina Cross, likely for the junction of roads from Anvil, Kvatch and Sutch. Sutch's presence would have created a three-way crossroads there, roads leading to Kvatch, Anvil and Sutch, or the Brenner River. After Sutch's removal, that spot was populated with a lone inn to give some point of interest in the empty region. Therefore, the inn's name, Brina Cross, is a vestige of the idea that this was a significant junction. It's a minor detail, but it shows how game content was adjusted to fill the void left by Sutch's cancellation. All in all, Fort Sutch in Oblivion is a shell, the last physical remnant of what was going to be a full-fledged city. The fort's unusually extensive layout, the unique Abbey component, its importance in a quest and Oblivion Gate event, and the absence of any civil authority all point to a city that fell into ruin long before the game's time. From a lore perspective, by the time of Oblivion, Sutch has already been gone for some time, its population dispersed or dead, its walls crumbling and overrun by brigands. The game never directly explains this, but it provides the stage on which we can imagine that story. With the evidence of Sutch's planned inclusion and removal firmly established, let's turn to why it was removed. What do developers and community researchers say about the cutting of Sutch, and what speculation exists about Bethesda's decision to axe an entire city from Oblivion? While Bethesda did not publish an official detailed account of cutting Sutch, we have various pieces of developer commentary and cut content analysis that shed light on the decision. So let's take a look at what is known or can be inferred about how and why Sutch was dropped during Oblivion's development, as well as the speculative reasoning behind it. The consensus among modders and community historians, supported by a few developer hints, is that Sutch was cut for practical development reasons, primarily time and resource constraints. Essentially, the team couldn't finish everything and chose to remove one city to lighten the load. Oblivion was an ambitious game with a new engine and many new systems, radiant AI, large world, etc., and even with a sizable team, Bethesda had to trim content to meet release deadlines. Creating a city in Oblivion wasn't trivial. Each city had unique architecture, NPCs with schedules and dialogue, quests, interiors, pathing, etc. It's been noted that Oblivion's cities were scaled back from their original concepts due to console hardware limits and disk space concerns. For example, all cities ended up being smaller and walled off into separate loaded cells, where originally the devs considered fully open cities. They also cut planned features like arenas in every city, reducing it to one arena in the Imperial City. With this context of cutting back, it seems that Sutch was the largest single cut. An entire city dropped early enough that little of its content remained by final game. Internally, Sutch likely wasn't as developed as the other cities when the cut was made, perhaps why it was chosen. The cutting room floor notes that very little of its existence actually remains in the game files, implying most assets or quests for Sutch were never fully implemented or were removed cleanly. From a design perspective, Bethesda might have assessed that Sutch contributed the least to the main storyline or unique gameplay. For instance, Kvatch was needed for the main plot, it's destroyed but central to the story, and each other city has multiple quests and NPCs tied to guilds and the main quest. Sutch, being on the border, might have been somewhat peripheral. We've already seen evidence that they planned at least a Fighters Guild presence and possibly some side quests, like the Scholar at Brittle Rock Cave, but perhaps it didn't have a major story role. When push came to shove, Bethesda put one city on the chopping block and Sutch was it. This aligns with speculation in the fan community that Sutch was removed because it was the least essential city for the game's narrative, making it the easiest to cut without leaving a gaping hole in the main quest or guild storylines. However, this may not entirely be the case, as we'll explore later. We've already covered many of the leftover evidences like map markers, quest text, etc., but from a development perspective, these give clues when Sutch was cut. The Fighters Guild journal entries, for example, indicate that at least some guild quest planning had Sutch in mind. The fact these were left in suggests the change happened somewhat last minute, or at least after writing the journal text. On the other hand, no physical house or NPC data for Sutch's city exists in the files. No unused Sutch NPCs or building message labelled for Sutch have been found, meaning the city was likely axed before they placed NPCs in the world. So Bethesda might have drawn up Sutch on paper, possibly started greyboxing the city layout, we know concept art existed, more on that in a moment, and written some quest outlines, but then halted and reassigned that content to other places, e.g. Anvil. The unique cell names, Fort Sutch, Castle Exterior, etc. remain as ghost outlines of the intended city extent, and notably, one cell, County Sutch Docks Exterior, exists and is actually used on the world map, west of where Sutch would be. It's a coastal cell with a river inlet. Possibly they considered giving Sutch a small port or docks area connecting to the Abyssinian Sea. The cell itself has no actual docks in the final game, just a river mouth, but its name suggests an earlier design where Sutch had access to waterways, consistent with that lake or river connection seen on the early map. The presence of that cell and its inclusion in the final world space indicates the world designers had partly built the area but then abandoned the city, leaving the empty docks cell in place, maybe as a natural river delta. Returning to concept art, in the Making of Oblivion documentary, there is a brief glimpse of a board showing concept art for all the cities of Cyrodiil. Fans who scrutinised that footage noticed Sutch's concept art pinned among the city designs. Lead artist Matthew Carafano is even seen pointing at the Sutch drawing in one shot, though the documentary never verbally discusses Sutch, likely because it was cut. From the blurry still, dedicated fans managed to deduce Sutch's possible layout. It might have been planned as a city by the water. Interestingly, the concept art suggests that Sutch was to be built on an island or peninsula on a river with a bridge connecting it to the mainland. This is a bit different from the E3 map, which showed a lake northeast of Sutch with perhaps a causeway. The concept seems to place the city itself astride a river's mouth. If true, this means Sutch went through iterations. Possibly at concept stage, a lakeside city, then revised to a more inland fort with a separate lake or dock, and then removed entirely. The variation in designs implies the team experimented with how to integrate Sutch's geography. The final Oblivion terrain as shipped doesn't have a lake or island at Sutch's site, just that flat plateau. So either they never terraformed the lake in, or they removed it when they cut Sutch. Some fans speculate that Sutch might have been envisioned almost like a coastal trading city with canals or an island castle. Something unique in flavour compared to the other Colovian cities. All told, the developer evidence portrays a picture of a city that was conceived with a full feature set. Guilds, chapel, possibly an arena, castle and docks, but then removed early enough that only map references and quest text hints remain. Todd Howard and other devs have spoken generally about cutting things from Oblivion. For example, Todd has commented on how Radiant AI had to be toned down and city features cut to fit the game on the Xbox 360, etc. It's easy to imagine Sutch was one casualty of those trims. But why Sutch specifically? We've touched upon it here or there, but we're going to enter the realm of speculation, but hopefully informed speculation. One area of speculation might be redundancy or balance. Cyrodiil already had another Gold Coast city, Anvil, and had a nearby city in Kvatch. Though of course Kvatch is destroyed in-game, it still counts in lore. Perhaps the designers felt that Western Cyrodiil had one city too many. Another speculation is quest content load. As we've seen already, Sutch might have originally been planned to host some side quests or a minor faction quest hub. The Fighters Guild evidence suggests guild quests originating there. But we haven't touched upon why Sutch was chosen for cutting. By moving those to Anvil or elsewhere, they could reduce one whole city's worth of work, AI schedules, dialogue, etc. And we are really going to delve into that in the next section. So to understand why Sutch may not have had enough content to justify its existence in the final release, we have to factor in a major piece of cut quest content, which this time involves politics. Or more specifically, a political storyline that was quietly gutted during development. In an early version of Oblivion, Bethesda had planned an entire quest line surrounding the Elder Council, the powerful ruling body left in charge of the Empire after the death of Uriel Septim. That storyline would have seen the player rise through the ranks of imperial nobility with titles such as Count of Kvatch and eventually Duke of Colovia, a high-ranking seat on the Elder Council itself. The cutting room floor and various developer comments hint at what this nobility arc might have looked like. The player was to begin by helping rebuild Kvatch after its destruction in the Daedric Assault, eventually being named Count to replace the fallen ruler. From there, the path would lead deeper into Cyrodiilic politics, ending in a seat on the Elder Council as Duke of Colovia, representing the Western Colovian Highlands. An area that would, quite logically, include Sutch. The implications are absolutely relevant to the cutting of Sutch. A Duke of Colovia would require a seat of power. Kvatch was ruined and Anvil was already governed by Countess Malona Umbranox. That leaves Sutch, or more accurately a restored Castle Sutch, as the most likely candidate for the player's personal stronghold in this cut storyline. As one Redditor speculated, Sutch was intended to become the player's personal stronghold as part of that questline. It adds a layer of meaning to the Baron Ignace mentioned in Thief of Virtue, if that barony was meant to become the player's own. The very title Baron of Colovia or Duke of Colovia suggests that Sutch was once more than a footnote. It was central to a story of ambition, power and political ascent. But that storyline was axed before it was implemented. Todd Howard, in a fan interview, later confirmed that the Elder Council questline was cut early because it defocused the main quest from dealing with the Daedra, diluting the sense of urgency in the Oblivion crisis. The political manoeuvring, the noble titles, and the rise to dukehood were shelved so that the game could focus more tightly on the Daedric threat. It's certainly one of my I wish it had this things, Todd admitted, lamenting the loss of a system that would have let the player take a seat at the Imperial table. And with the Elder Council content gone, Sutch may have gone with it. Without a need for a Colovian capital city under the player's control, there was no longer a narrative function for a city like Sutch. If it once was intended as the player's political base, its removal becomes clearer. It didn't fit the revised vision of a streamlined, Daedra-focused narrative. Sutch, like the nobility system that would have elevated us to rule it, was deemed a distraction. Today, of course, all that's left are hints: the unused nobility faction, the missing quest MS-50 between the Kvatch missions, and the flat land at Fort Sutch that looks like it was meant for something grander. A city perhaps, a capital, a seat of power for the newest Duke of Colovia, a title that, like the city of Sutch, never came to be. It's worth emphasising what we've looked at, that there are two ways to frame Sutch's disappearance. One is from a real-world development standpoint, Bethesda cut it, and the other is from an in-universe lore standpoint, some historical event caused its ruin. Bethesda's cut created a lore gap that had to be rationalised. Initially, Oblivion itself gave no explanation, effectively leaving it as a mystery or assuming players might not notice. Over time, later games and materials like Elder Scrolls Online have retroactively filled in lore reasons for Sutch's fall, which we'll explore later. This is a common phenomenon in large fictional universes. A development decision later gets woven into the lore as if it was planned all along. So, as we've seen, developer evidence strongly indicates that Sutch was dropped due to limitations in development bandwidth. It was likely removed relatively early in level production, enough that very few assets needed deletion, but after some quest writing occurred, hence the journals and dialogues that slipped through, the team likely prioritised other content and felt Sutch was the lowest priority city. Fans discovered these remnants, and thus the lost city of Sutch became a piece of Elder Scrolls legend in its own right. As we've alluded to and we'll see later, Bethesda did get a chance to revisit Sutch in a different game, Elder Scrolls Online, effectively canonising some aspects of it. But before that, it was the modding community that took up the mantle to restore Sutch in Oblivion. The mystery of Sutch and the obvious gap it left in Oblivion's world have inspired fans to fill in the void themselves. Over the years, multiple mods have been created to reintroduce the city of Sutch into Oblivion's game world. These projects ranged from simple additions of a small town to ambitious reconstructions of a full-fledged city with quests and NPCs. Here, we'll highlight a few notable fan efforts that bring Sutch back to life, along with my favourite, which we'll look into in a bit more detail. One of the earlier and popular mods was Imperial Empire Unique Cities Sutch. This mod re-adds the Cyrodiilic city of Sutch to Oblivion, and attempts to do so in a lore-friendly way. It builds Sutch as a functional settlement in the Gold Coast, complete with walls, buildings and residents. Imperial Sutch was part of a series that enhanced or added to cities, and in this case it essentially creates Sutch from scratch based on the modder's interpretation. It gives the player a chance to visit a new city where only a fort ruin stood in the vanilla game. According to its description, the city was designed to mesh with evidence from earlier versions of Oblivion, likely referring to the pre-release info available about Sutch. The mod thereby acts as a restoration, making Sutch a living city once more. Another approach was taken by a team on AFK Mods, a community site. Their Sutch Village mod is described as our take on restoring Sutch to the game, based on extremely sketchy lore found in scattered places on the web. This wording acknowledges that they compiled all the hints about Sutch and then had to exercise some creative liberty. Sketchy lore indeed, since much was speculative, to design the settlement. Sutch Village presumably is smaller, called a village rather than city, perhaps imagining Sutch in a later stage of decline. Mods like this sometimes choose to depict Sutch not at its height but as a modest town struggling to rebuild, which can align nicely with lore that it was ruined. It's a creative interpretation to have such exist in the time of Oblivion without contradicting the fact that it's supposed to be ruined. Maybe the mod frames it as a resettlement attempt by some folks near the fort. Beyond mods for the original Oblivion engine, the ambitious Skyblivion project, a fan remake of Oblivion in the Skyrim engine, has taken a keen interest in Sutch. The Skyblivion developers have explicitly stated they will include the city of Sutch in their remake and even expand on it. According to a PC Gamer article, Skyblivion will expand Fort Sutch into an entire city ruin inhabited by bandits while still accommodating the Dark Brotherhood quest and the Oblivion Gate event at that location. In other words, they plan to depict Sutch as a ruined city, presumably remnants of walls and buildings with bandits camped in them which the player can explore. This approach keeps the lore that Sutch is gone by the time of Oblivion, but instead of just an empty fort, they will present it as a larger ruined cityscape, a sort of what might have been scenario. Skyblivion is even adding a huge dungeon under Sutch inspired by the idea of cut content. They referenced the UESP's documentation of Sutch's evidence, like the journal entries in flat terrain, as inspiration to do the cut city justice in the remake. Essentially, the modders are seizing the opportunity to restore Bethesda's cut content, so players will get to experience a version of Sutch within the Skyblivion game. Given Skyblivion's wide scope and visibility, this means the legendary lost city of Sutch is being canonized in a fan remake context, likely with their own narrative explaining its ruin. It's an elegant solution. Players will be able to explore a bandit-infested ruin of Sutch, consistent with Oblivion's timeline that the city's glory days are over, yet satisfying the curiosity of what the city might have looked like. And among the many mods that seek to resurrect Sutch, the Imperial City of Sutch Reborn by the Dragon Captions team is my favourite. Originally released in 2008 and updated for years afterwards, the mod transforms Fort Sutch and its surrounding plains into a sprawling settlement complete with districts, docks, voiced NPCs, and its own civic identity. The mod imagines a backstory in which Sutch was sacked by the bandit king Roderick in the early years of Uriel Septim's reign, left in ruins for over 4 decades. The player, as Champion of Cyrodiil, is tasked with completing Chancellor Okato's mission, a royal decree to reclaim and rebuild the fallen city. The city itself is structured into named districts: the Plaza, the New Haven Residential Quarter, a castle sector, and the Chapel Plaza, each with distinct architectural styles and functions. To the southwest, the Owl Cove docks extend the settlement down to the river, complete with shops, taverns, homes, and an inn. The level of detail here is amazing, with over 7 main quests and a bunch of minor ones, plus fully scripted AI packages and voiced characters. Sutch Reborn behaves like a full Bethesda-made city. Some of the design choices also reflect the lore Bethesda had hinted at but never implemented. For instance, the docks sit within the game's unused County Sutch docks cell, one of the leftovers in the construction set from when Sutch was likely still in active development. The mod uses this exact location, linking Bethesda's scrapped geography to a new functioning urban space. From a story perspective, Sutch Reborn runs with the idea that the city once stood proud before being overrun. The Bandit King Roderick is obviously an extension of the same Roderick seen in the vanilla Fort Sutch Dark Brotherhood quest. But here he becomes the central villain in a restoration arc that has you ultimately returning Sutch to glory. There's even a player home, scripted events tied to ogre attacks, and a side quest involving a villa near Skingrad. Unlike many mods that begin and end as environment add-ons, Sutch Reborn ties the city's return into a full narrative, drawing on unused assets and lore fragments while confidently filling in the gaps. It feels like the definitive version of Sutch that might have existed had Bethesda followed through on their early Elder Council or Baron of Colovia questlines. So, as you can see, the fan community did not let Sutch remain a footnote. Through mods, they have kept the idea of Sutch alive, either by restoring it as a living city or depicting its ruins in more detail. These efforts demonstrate the love and what-if wonder the Elder Scrolls fans have. Where Bethesda had to say, "We can't do this," modders have effectively said, "We'll do it for you." So now that we've seen how fans addressed Sutch's absence, let's now turn to how Bethesda themselves actually revisited Sutch. Not in Oblivion, but in the Elder Scrolls Online. ESO, set in the Second Era, provided the perfect opportunity to portray Sutch at its height, or at least while it still existed, and to offer an official explanation for its eventual disappearance. Roughly a decade and some change after Oblivion's release, the Elder Scrolls Online finally gave Sutch its moment in the spotlight. ESO is set in the Second Era, specifically around the year 582, which is about 800 years before the events of Oblivion, and frequently expands the map of Tamriel with new zones and chapters. In one of its updates, ESO introduced the Gold Coast region of Cyrodiil, the same area containing Anvil and Kvatch. Fans were immediately curious: would Sutch, which lore places on the Gold Coast, appear in this portrayal of the Second Era? The answer turned out to be yes. Sutch is present in ESO as a settlement, giving us our first official explorable version of the city that was lost in Oblivion. Sutch in the year 582 of the Second Era is a town. Not one of the biggest cities of Cyrodiil, but a prosperous trading hub nonetheless. The developers did not make it a massive walled city on the scale of, say, Coral or Shadenhall, but it's far from a mere village. It has a distinct layout and several points of interest. The town features winding streets and a central square with a well surrounded by houses and shops. This layout aligns with a description in the lore. In the centre of Sutch lies the town square, with paths winding out from the centre to the rest of the city. It suggests a somewhat organic, perhaps crowded town plan, rather than the rigid layouts seen in some other imperial cities. Notable locations include Rosalind's alchemy shop, Tham's tavern, the Sutch depository, a Sutch mine, and a way shrine for fast travel. The Sutch depository indicates the town's wealth and role as a trade centre, whereas the mine suggests local industry, mining being a source of income for the townsfolk. The tavern and alchemy shop give the place commercial life and character. And in terms of population, Sutch is said to be mixed between Imperials and Redguards, which makes sense given its border location. Lore had mentioned that dynamic, a place where Colovians and Hammerfell traders mingle. The most compelling part of Sutch's appearance in ESO, though, is the storyline associated with it. Sutch in Elder Scrolls Online is not a peaceful town when the player arrives. It's actually in the middle of a crisis, one that foreshadows its later doom. The main quest in Sutch, titled Terror of the Weald, involves a group of vampires overrunning the town. Obviously, as the player, it's up to you to save the town and population, or what's left of it. The town is in such a state that it really is uncertain that it can ever recover from this calamity. It has a terrible reputation now, travellers will avoid it even more, and it's lost most of its workforce and talent. Rebuilding will take enormous effort and investment, and it's unclear if help will ever come. Elder Scrolls Online leaves it somewhat open-ended. Sutch isn't instantly a ghost town, but it is badly crippled. This event is strongly implied to be the beginning of the end for Sutch. Essentially, Bethesda used this storyline to provide a logical in-world cause for Sutch's eventual disappearance by the late Third Era. A vampire-induced catastrophe that plunged the town into decline from which it never fully recovered. If we align timelines, after this incident, Sutch might limp on for a while. It was still marked on maps later in the Second Era and even in the early Third Era, suggesting perhaps it was rebuilt to some extent or at least remained known. But one can imagine that it never really returned to its former glory and gradually became depopulated. Perhaps by the time of Tiber Septim's unification, Sutch was a shell of a city. There is a lore reference that sea shanties from Sutch were popular among sailors around the time of the Tiber War, which suggests Sutch was still inhabited enough to have a culture. If sailors know songs from Sutch, presumably its port or docks were still active around then. So maybe the town did rebuild partially under the Riemann Empire or during the interregnum after the vampire incident. However, come the Third Era, we don't hear much of Sutch at all. It's likely that sometime in the early to mid-Third Era, perhaps during a crisis or economic shift, that Sutch finally was abandoned or destroyed, leaving only the fort by the time of Oblivion. Regardless, Elder Scrolls Online giving us the vampire invasion of Sutch is a brilliant bit of retroactive storytelling. It provides a concrete dramatic reason for why the city fell somewhere long before the events of Oblivion. In essence, the developers took advantage of a loose thread and tied it off with an event that fits Elder Scrolls themes: supernatural danger, local heroism, tragedy. For fans, it was very gratifying to see Sutch acknowledged in official lore at last. It felt like a homage to the community's interest, and it enriches the world by not leaving a blank spot on the map. So, as we've seen, the Elder Scrolls Online resurrected Sutch in the Second Era, contextualizing it as a place that experienced quite an extreme misfortune and possibly never fully recovered. This not only allowed players to finally see Sutch, but it also integrated the Lost City into the official narrative, explaining its disappearance in a story sense. The inclusion of Sutch in ESO effectively canonizes what was previously only hinted. Sutch did exist as a city, and something catastrophic led to its ruin. With ESO's events, we can say that by the time of Oblivion, the memory of Sutch would be of a city that fell long ago, which aligns perfectly with Oblivion's depiction of just a fort ruin. Now that we've examined Sutch's journey from lore to lost content to fan revival and official revival, let's discuss the various theories on its disappearance in-universe and any remaining mysteries. After all, ESO's explanation is one, but are there other possibilities or unanswered questions? From an in-universe perspective, the disappearance of Sutch as an inhabited city by the late Third Era begs for speculation. While Elder Scrolls Online provides a strong explanation, the vampire massacre and ensuing decline, lore enthusiasts have debated a few other theories over the years, especially before ESO shed light on it. So let's explore the main theories and factors considered regarding why Sutch vanished from Cyrodiil's political map. The most direct theory, now supported by ESO's storyline, is that Sutch was effectively destroyed by the vampire crisis of the Second Era. The bandit vampire attack killed most of the population, and although the immediate threat was quelled, the town never fully recovered. It likely became a ghost town over subsequent decades or centuries due to a loss of trade and manpower. Perhaps some survivors rebuilt in the short term, enough for it to appear on maps through the late Second Era, but the golden days were over. By the time the Septim Empire solidified, Sutch might have been reduced to a minor settlement. Its county was absorbed by Kvatch, possibly because there was no longer a functioning city or ruler in Sutch. Over the Third Era, any remaining village at Sutch's site could have withered away, or been abandoned during crises like the Imperial Simulacrum when turmoil gripped the Empire in the late Third Era, or the Warp in the West, a massive Dragonbreak event also in the late Third Era, which of course leads to the time of Oblivion, where only the fort, maintained in some capacity for strategic reasons, stands as a marker of Sutch's former location. This theory essentially says Sutch died a slow death after a Second Era tragedy. Another theory that has been floated is more mundane. Perhaps Sutch simply could not sustain itself economically or politically once Cyrodiil was fully unified. Consider that in the Riemann and Second Empire period, Sutch had value as a border trading hub with Hammerfell. But once the Septim Empire united all of Tamriel, internal border trade might have been less lucrative. If goods could flow freely across provinces, Sutch might lose its unique position. Additionally, the rise of Kvatch and Anvil as major centres under the Third Empire's administration might have overshadowed Sutch. Kvatch in particular, being a kingdom county seat with a long history, could have drawn resources and people away from Sutch. It's noted that by the Third Era, the area that was County Sutch was administered as part of County Kvatch. This suggests an administrative reorganisation, possibly intentional by the Empire. Some have speculated that perhaps Sutch was outright destroyed in a later war, such as the Tiber Wars or other conflicts in the early Third Era. For instance, Tiber Septim's campaign to conquer Hammerfell involved battles along the Colovian border. It's conceivable that Sutch, being near Hammerfell, could have been caught in the crossfire or sacked by one side. However, lore doesn't explicitly record a sack of Sutch during Tiber's conquest. In fact, sources say Sutch swore fealty peacefully when Colovia united under Tiber. Another conflict could be the War of the Red Diamond, a civil war in the early Third Era among Septim pretenders. That war did see battles in Cyrodiil, although it's mostly recorded around the Imperial City and some eastern areas. There is no mention of Sutch, but a local skirmish or razing is not impossible. And then there's the Hammerfell annexation theory. Tying into the odd reference from the Thief of Virtue book, one theory is that perhaps Hammerfell once annexed Sutch, or that there was another settlement named Sutch in Hammerfell. The book stating Sutch is in Hammerfell prompted fans to wonder if at some point Sutch's territory could have been ceded to Hammerfell, maybe during the interregnum when Cyrodiil was fractured. If Sutch had become Hammerfell's, the Empire retaking it later could have left it devastated. Alternatively, if there were coincidentally another Sutch, though that's not supported by any other text, it could confuse the matter. However, the simplest explanation is that the Hammerfell mention is simply an error. Then there's the possibility of a natural disaster or some other calamity. While not widely suggested, it's worth noting that sometimes cities fall to plagues, fires, or other disasters unrelated to war or monsters. As an example, Cyrodiil had the Canatan flu in the late Second Era, but Sutch clearly survived that since it was active after. There's no mention of a huge fire or earthquake or anything as such, so this is a less likely angle. The vampire infestation effectively fills the role of a calamity. In evaluating these theories, the most comprehensive explanation is a combination. The vampire blood fiend plague of the Second Era gravely wounded Sutch, it limped on but lost status, its county was absorbed by Kvatch. It might have faced further strife under Tiber or others. Ultimately, it dwindled to nothing, with only the fort remaining by the time of Oblivion. We must also consider, if Sutch was only fairly recently gone by the time of Oblivion, wouldn't people talk about it as a historical footnote? It's interesting that no NPC in Oblivion ever mentions the old city of Sutch. They speak of Fort Sutch as a present place, as a ruin or landmark, but not of a lost city. This could simply be because Bethesda didn't script such conversations, not wanting to confuse players with a city they can't see. In lore though, presumably scholars in-universe do know that a city called Sutch once existed. The fact that Thief of Virtue and other books still circulate in Oblivion's time indicates the memory isn't entirely gone. So an in-world scholar or a librarian could theoretically have told the player about Sutch's history, but the game just never broaches it. Taken as a whole, the tale of Sutch's vanishing is a blend of fact and speculation that demonstrates how Elder Scrolls lore evolves. What started as a development cut became a mystery, then fan conjecture, and eventually was woven back into official lore as a piece of actual history. All in all, the Lost City of Sutch is a fascinating case where game development and game lore intersected to create an enduring mystery. On one hand, Sutch exemplifies a practical reality. Bethesda had to trim content, and thus an entire city was dropped from Oblivion during development, leaving ghostly traces in the game's code and world. On the other hand, within the wider narrative of the Elder Scrolls, Sutch is now the story of a once thriving Colovian city that met a tragic fate. a footnote in history by the time we, as Oblivion players, tour Cyrodiil. For me, as with anything that has a hint of mystery about it, Sutch will always hold a special allure. Obviously, that's where this video came from and what drove me to explore the mystery of Sutch from all angles. Design documents to lore books, and we can finally say we mostly know what happened to it. Both in the real world it was cut and in the fictional world it fell to tragedy. It's a fantastic example of how cut content can spawn the mystery of a missing city that inspires investigation and, in the end, brand new storytelling to fit it into the lore properly. As players, we're actually pretty lucky that the community and the developers both took steps over the years to resolve this mystery. Anyway, let's end on a wistful note. The next time you're near where Sutch would have been, take a moment to look over the quiet hills and the empty area. In your mind's eye, picture the tall castle walls of Baron Ignace, the chapel of Kinreth ringing its bells, the merchants haggling in the marketplace, the signs of life that are silent in the remaining nature. Imagine the bustling city that could have been. Oblivion's missing city may never officially appear in Oblivion itself, but thanks to lore, modders, subsequent appearances and community imagination, it lives on. A worthy piece of Elder Scrolls lore, a reality in one game, a half memory in another.